The American Medical Association just released new burnout data from nearly 19,000 physicians. It's the largest annual check on burnout in the medical field, and the findings are surprising. Burnout is dropping. It's at a 5-year low, but that's not the real story. The real story is hidden inside that number because when you look at the data and pair it with research on OTs, SLPs, PTs, and behavior analysts, there are four truths about burnout that almost no one is talking about. And every one of them changes how you should think about your own work. I'm a behavior analyst and I look at patterns in behavior all day long. So when this report came out, I didn't just read the headlines. I went looking for what they were missing. And the third truth is the one I think every clinician needs to hear. There's a single factor that predicts burnout more than anything else you'd guess. I'll get to that in a minute, but let's start here. Truth number one, your specialty matters more than your workload. The biggest predictor of whether you're burned out isn't how hard your work is. It's not how organized you are, and it's not how good your boundaries are. It's the kind of work you do. Now, I know what you're thinking, but stay with me on this. Look at the data across allied health. Roughly 70% of behavior analysts report moderate to high burnout. Around half of physical therapists and occupational therapists fall somewhere between 30 and 60%. Within the same profession, burnout can nearly double depending on where you work, who you serve, and what your day actually looks like. The AMA report makes this even clearer. Inside the same medical profession, with the same training, the same documentation, and the same healthcare environment, burnout ranged from 26% in some specialties to almost 50% in others. That's nearly twice the burnout in the same type of career. And the part that surprised me wasn't that ER doctors are at the top. It's actually that OBGYN came in at almost 46%, nearly tied with emergency medicine. OBGYN doesn't have the constant ER level triage. The schedule is more predictable. There's more continuity with patients. So why is the burnout almost as high? It's not how intense the work looks from the outside. It's everything the schedule doesn't show. It's the emotional cost of a client who is struggling, the weight of a family who's counting on you and running out of hope, the cognitive load of switching between completely different cases back to back. None of that shows up in your hours, but it shapes your burnout more than your hours do. And that's the pattern showing up in your work too. Most allied health fields don't have the formal specialties that physicians do. An OT can specialize, but the boundaries are looser. A BCBA might shift between case types throughout their entire career. A PT's caseload depends a lot on where they work. So when you hear your specialty matters more than your workload, it's tempting to think that this finding doesn't apply to you, but it does. It just shows up differently. For us, the equivalent isn't a board certified specialty. It's your work setting, your caseload, and the population that you serve. Most burnout advice treats this like a personal failing. You don't set good enough boundaries. You didn't manage your time. You didn't take care of yourself. The data shows something different. Two clinicians can do everything right and still end up in completely different places because they're not doing the same job. One of them isn't failing harder, they're just playing a harder game. So here are two things that you can do this week. First, stop comparing yourself to other clinicians. The colleague who seems to have it all figured out might be dealing with circumstances completely different from yours. The one who looks calm might just be earlier in their burnout curve. You don't actually know what their week looks like or what they're going through at home. Comparison feels like measurement, but it's not. It's just a way to make yourself feel worse with incomplete information. And second, the more demanding your work is by default, the more deliberate your planning has to be. If your role keeps you cognitively or emotionally maxed out most days, you can't run on instinct and good intentions. You need time in your week that's actually yours. You need to know what's actually realistic to take on. Demanding work doesn't need more willpower, it needs more structure. So here's truth number two: burnout dropped, but the work itself didn't change. So here's the headline: physicians' burnout dropped to about 42% in 2025. That's down from 48% in 2023, the lowest number in 5 years. If you only read the headline, that sounds like good news. Things are getting better. We're turning a corner. But stay with me on this one because the headline is technically true and still misleading. The AMA points to real progress. Some health systems have invested in clinician well-being. AI models are cutting documentation time. Organizations are taking burnout more seriously than they used to. These improvements are real and they do make a difference. But here's the part that the headline doesn't say: 42% means 4 out of every 10 physicians have at least one symptom of burnout right now. The general US workforce sits closer to 25%. Healthcare sits at 42%, and that's the good number. We've normalized a rate that's nearly double what most workers experience, and we're calling it progress. Remember, physicians are the best number that we have. Allied health can be even worse. That's not progress. The system is still broken. It's just a little less than it was before. Here's why that matters for you. If you've been waiting for things to get better, the trend is telling you something important. The best case scenario, things will be slightly better than they were 2 years ago. Whatever is making your week hard right now has to be fixed by you, not because the system shouldn't change, because it absolutely should, but because you can't wait for it. So here are 2 things you can do this week. First, stop waiting for permission to take care of yourself. A lot of clinicians are quietly waiting for their organization to tell them it's okay to leave on time, to push back on a caseload, to say no to one more meeting. That permission is not coming from them. The system isn't paying attention to your week the way that you are. So give yourself the permission you've been waiting for. Decide what your week needs to look like to be sustainable and act like that's already been approved. Second, make a short list of what's actually in your control this week. Your organization's staffing levels are not on that list. Your caseload cap might not be either. But what you do with your first 20 minutes of your morning might be. What you say yes to on a Friday afternoon is. When you can see clearly what's in your control, you stop spending energy on what isn't. That's not giving up on the bigger problems. That's being strategic about where you actually put your energy. So here's truth number 3. The thing driving your burnout probably isn't your documentation. Every clinician I've talked to has a version of this story. The notes that pile up, the reports due on Friday, the documentation you're still finishing at dinner. If I asked you what's burning you out, paperwork would probably make your top 3. And that makes sense. You can see it piling up and it's always there. But here's what the research actually shows. A study of over 1,300 clinicians measured 2 things: how much time they spent on documentation and what their local work culture was like. Things like whether they felt supported by their supervisor, whether their team functioned well, and whether they felt valued at work. Local work culture predicted burnout 13 times more than documentation did. 13 times. The documentation that follows you home, that accounts for about 1% of the difference in burnout between clinicians. The culture you work in every day accounts for nearly 18%. Now, I want to be careful here because I know what you're thinking. You already know the culture in your organization is a problem, and you also know that the culture is one of the hardest things to change, especially if you're not in a leadership role. You can find strategies to get more efficient with documentation. There aren't a lot of equivalent strategies for fixing a broken culture from the inside. So I'm not going to tell you to fix the culture of your organization. This data changes how you should evaluate your situation. If culture predicts 13 times more burnout than documentation, Then a difficult culture with a manageable caseload is more dangerous than a heavy caseload in a supportive environment. Most clinicians have this completely backwards. They'll take a job with a lighter caseload without asking hard questions about the team they're walking into. Or they'll stay in a toxic environment because the documentation burden seems manageable. The research is telling you where to look, not at your workload, at your environment. So here are two things you can do this week. First, assess your culture honestly, not optimistically. Most clinicians know their culture is difficult, but frame it as something that's temporary. It's a hard season. Things will get better when the project ends, or the new manager will be different. Use the research as a reality check. Does your supervisor have your back when things are hard? Does your team function well under pressure? Do you feel valued? If the honest answers are mostly no, that's a culture problem that you can't ignore. Second, if you're evaluating a new role or a new setting, ask different questions than you normally would. Most clinicians ask about caseload, pay, and schedule. Based on this research, the more important questions are about culture. What does supervision actually look like here? How does the team handle a hard week? What happens when someone on the team is struggling? The answers to those questions will predict your burnout risk better than anything else on the job description. Okay, now we're at the last truth, truth number 4. You don't need more resilience, you need a better system. Almost every burnout solution you'll find points back at you. Build more resilience, practice mindfulness, set better boundaries, take a vacation, take a bubble bath. We've heard them all. These aren't bad ideas, but they're treating the symptom, not the structure. And here's what the research actually shows. A study of over 800 behavior analysts found that job crafting, making small, deliberate changes to how you structure your work, predicted lower burnout. The difference wasn't personality, it was the structure of the work. There's also research on identity-based habits. The idea is that the most durable habits aren't built around tasks. They're built around identity. When your habits are tied to who you want to become rather than what you're supposed to do, they stop feeling like obligations. They start feeling like choices, and choices stick in a way that rules just don't. Most productivity systems are generic. They weren't designed with clinical work in mind. The unpredictability, the back-to-back sessions, the cases that stay with you mentally long after the day ends. That's why they feel like they're missing something, because they are. The clinicians who aren't burning out have built a structure designed around the realities of their job. They know what they can realistically take on. They plan before the week happens instead of reacting to it as it comes. And they have a system that runs even when on the weeks when they don't feel like running it. That's not a personality trait, it's a skill and it's learnable. So here are the last two things I want to leave you with this week. First, if you've been wondering how much longer you can do this, look at your structure before you make any career decisions. What does your week actually look like before anything goes wrong? Do you have a clear sense of how much you can realistically take on? Do you plan your week in advance or react to it as it comes? The answers to those questions will tell you more about your burnout risk than any resilience assessment. And second, pick one structural change to make this week, something you can actually see in your schedule, a planning session you block at the start of the week, a hard stop time you decide on before the week even starts, a cap on what you'll commit to before the week begins. One structural change, that's it. Start there. Everything else can build from that. So here's what this research is really telling you. Burnout in clinical work is high. It's been high for a really long time. And it's not mainly because it's of you, it's structural. And structural problems need structural solutions. You now have 8 things you can do this week, 2 from each truth. You don't have to do them all. Just pick one that felt most true when you heard it and start there. If you want a system that puts this into practice, when built specifically for clinical work, that's exactly what Master Your Week is designed to do. It helps you figure out what you can actually take on. Plan your week before it happens and build habits around the kind of clinician you want to be. The link is in the description. If this resonated, watch this next video. It goes deeper into exactly why most productivity advice doesn't work for clinicians and what to do instead. You can click this link now. If this video gave you something useful, leave a comment telling me which truth you connected with the most. I read them all. I'm Amelia Delphonse, and it's time to master your week.